I'm sorry, Serafina. I'm truly sorry that you built your life on a foundation of damp sand, and I'm sorry that my son is the one who will drown when it washes away. That was the first sentence out of my mouth. Not the whispered, polite submission my son, Marcus, had demanded, but a cannon shot across the bow of that ridiculous, glittering ship my daughter-in-law called a life. You might think an old woman of 76, wearing a sensible navy dress and shoes that don't pinch, doesn't have it in her to start a war. But let me tell you, when you've spent a lifetime building bridges, sometimes you realize the most important thing to do is burn the one that leads to rot. I was perched on a velvet dining chair that felt suspiciously like it was upholstered in the hide of a recently deceased unicorn. I call the chair a perch because in Serafina's house you don't sit. You occupy a designated temporary space, always ready to spring up and admire the next imported gewgaw. This wasn't a home. It was a stage set for an opera I didn't know the words to. The ceiling in the dining room was so far above us, I swear a small airplane could have done a loop-the-loop. The chandelier, an obscene cascade of crystals that Marcus must have paid for with several years of his soul, cast strange, sharp shadows. Every time I looked up, I had the fleeting, morbid thought, that thing is just waiting for the right moment to fall and turn us all into very flat, very rich pancakes, but I kept that little thought locked tight, because tonight I was on my best behavior, or so I told myself. Serafina, Marcus's wife, was the star of the show. She glided, she didn't walk, in a gown the color of an expensive glass of champagne. Everything about her was meticulously curated. The severe architectural haircut, the diamonds that winked like malicious little eyes, and the smile, oh, that smile. It was perfect, wide, and entirely devoid of warmth. It was a contractual obligation of a smile. She spent the first hour showcasing her acquisitions for the 10 other guests, who were, to a person, dressed identically in shades of tasteful, expensive boredom. This aged Parmesan, Serafina cooed, gesturing to a tiny sliver on a marble platter, was air-freighted from a single, organic farm outside Parma. The cows are given classical music and daily affirmations. The guests nodded solemnly, as if contemplating the deep philosophical implications of dairy products' mental health. The olive oil, she continued, holding up a dark bottle that looked like it had been salvaged from a shipwreck, is first press, bottled under a specific lunar phase. It's impossible to find. Everything was imported, impossible or exclusive. I tried to chime in once, telling a simple story about the time Marcus, as a boy, accidentally ate an entire tube of toothpaste, thinking it was mint icing. It earned me a blank stare from a woman named Beatrice, who then immediately pivoted back to comparing the difficulties of finding adequate staff for one's private jet. I felt the deep, familiar ache of being an alien in my own son's universe. I missed the days of my chipped kitchen table, a pot of my famous chili, and laughter that didn't sound rehearsed. I realized the true source of my unease wasn't the pretension. It was the sheer unreality of it all. It wasn't just expensive. It was brittle. It felt like a stage painted to look like stone, and all it would take was one good push to knock it over. The main course arrived. Tiny, immaculate squares of beef served on plates so large they could have landed a helicopter. As Serafina launched into the grand story of their latest renovation, the new master bath, I committed my fatal error. And the soaking tub, Serafina announced, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is set against a wall of pure Carrara marble. We had it brought in, slab by slab, from Italy. It weighed nearly a ton. She paused, expecting the collective gasp of admiration. I had been staring at that wall for 10 minutes. It wasn't the white of Italian marble. It was a slightly muddier, warmer tone. I knew that stone. I'd lived next to a limestone quarry outside of Denton for 20 years. I knew that specific pale gold vein. I put down my absurdly delicate fork. Oh, that's lovely, dear. But I recognize that vein. Isn't that the beautiful cream limestone from the old Kinsley quarry? The one that closed down? They used to make those nice countertops. The room went silent, but it wasn't the awkward silence from the transcript's joke. This was a deeper, colder silence. This was the silence that follows a gunshot. Serafina's perfect composure shattered, revealing something ugly and panicked underneath. Her porcelain cheeks flushed crimson, and her eyes, usually so sharp and controlled, darted wildly to Marcus. "Ilara," she hissed, using my first name in a way that felt like a curse. "You must be mistaken. This is Carrara, imported. It cost us a small fortune." "Oh, I'm certain you paid a fortune, dear," I replied calmly, meeting her gaze. "Good limestone isn't cheap, but Carrara? No, the mineral deposit is completely different. The way the light catches it. I had a little bird bath made of Kinsley stone. It's lovely, I had done it. I hadn't just insulted a bottle of wine. I had exposed a lie built into the very bones of their expensive illusion. I had named the local dirt they were trying to pass off as European refinement. The rest of the evening was a frozen performance. The guests, now keenly aware that the house itself might be a lie, began to whisper nervously. Serafina never took her eyes off me, and her gaze felt less like anger and more like a desperate, cornered fear. As the tiny, geometrically perfect dessert was served, something that looked like edible modern architecture, Marcus caught my eye. His look wasn't disappointment. It was pure, unadulterated terror. He gave a sharp nod toward the back hall. I followed him down a corridor that smelled faintly of expensive air freshener and new carpet. The hallway was lined, not with family photos, but with framed, signed memorabilia, sports jerseys, a faded movie poster, things Marcus never cared about as a boy. They were props. He didn't take me to his office. He took me to the security monitoring room, a small, windowless space tucked behind a bookshelf. It was here, surrounded by screens showing views of the immense, cold house, that the air felt thickest. He closed the soundproof door. "Mom, what was that?" His voice was low, shaking, and desperate. "What was what, Marcus?" "The marble?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "It's Kinsley limestone. They even had that distinct little fissure line near the floor molding. I don't care what bloody stone it is." "You embarrassed her! You ruined the evening. Do you have any idea how important these people are?" He ran a hand through his perfectly sculpted hair. "Marcus, I was just pointing out the truth. Why would you lie about something so trivial?" He leaned in close, his eyes wild and shadowed in the faint glow of the monitors. "It's not trivial. Serafina has been managing the accounts. We've had to take out a new private loan to cover the last round of renovations, and they based the valuation on her list of imported luxury materials. The marble was a key piece of collateral." My breath hitched. This was the truth, the cold core hidden beneath the velvet. "You're telling me you're lying to the bank about the materials used in your home? It was her idea," he whispered harshly. "She swore it was fine, that it was standard industry practice. She needed the house to look perfect for the investors. And you almost blew the whole thing up in front of Beatrice, whose husband is the principal investor in the firm holding the loan." The fear of losing him evaporated, replaced by the righteous heat of a mother's fury. This wasn't about a joke. This was about integrity and ruin. "So you want me to apologize?" I said, my voice hardening, "for not participating in your wife's fraud?" "Yes, now. You need to go back out there, tell her you were confused, that your old eyes misread the stone, and beg her forgiveness. Apologize, or you will never step foot in this family again." The ultimatum hung there, heavy and metallic. The boy I raised, the one who scraped his knee and cried for me, the one who worked 3 jobs to pay for college, was gone, replaced by this panicked, compromised man. I looked at the security monitors. I could see the glint of Serafina's earrings as she spoke to Beatrice, her hand fluttering nervously. She was playing the victim, casting me as the jealous, senile mother-in-law. I felt the panic tighten in my chest, a cold, dry knot of fear I hadn't felt since Marcus was a boy and ran a fever of 104. But fear, I've learned in my 76 years, is just a whisper you choose to ignore. Pull up your chair, dear one, and let old Ilara tell you exactly how you stand your ground when the ground itself is shifting beneath your feet. You must listen closely to what happened in the next 10 minutes, because those minutes changed everything. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale, sterile air of the security room. "All right. Marcus," I said, my voice quiet, almost a lullaby. "I'll apologize, but I'm going to do it my way, and you need to decide right now whether you want the peace Serafina offers or the truth I'm about to give you." I didn't wait for his answer. I just turned and walked out, leaving him standing there amidst the cold, glowing screens. The walk back to the dining room was the longest of my life. My hands were steady, but the rhythm of my heart was the only sound I could hear. I was walking not toward a party, but toward a demolition. As I entered the room, the conversations, which had resumed in low, agitated hums, snapped off instantly. Everyone looked at me, the perpetrator. Serafina was exactly where I expected her to be, at the center, holding court. She had her hand gently clasped in Beatrice's, her eyes glistening, clearly detailing the cruel injustice she had suffered at the hands of her sweet but confused mother-in-law. I walked the length of the table, past the untouched espresso cups and the abandoned tiny desserts. I stopped directly in front of Serafina, who immediately adopted a look of martyred, fragile forgiveness. "Ilara," she whispered, her voice husky with faux emotion. "It's all right. I know you didn't mean it. It's just been a long day." I cut her off. I spoke in a voice that was calm, clear, and perfectly projected, the voice of a woman who has no time left for games. "Serafina," I began, and the whole room leaned in. Marcus had slipped back into the doorway, his face pale, watching like a man bracing for the impact of an inevitable wreck. "I'm sorry, Serafina. I'm truly sorry that you built your life on a foundation of damp sand, and I'm sorry that my son is the one who will drown when it washes away." The air thickened. Beatrice's teacup rattled in its saucer. Serafina's mouth hung open, her eyes darting to Marcus again, a desperate plea for him to intervene, to silence the crazy old woman. He did nothing. He was frozen. I continued, softer now, but with the power of a lifetime of suppressed common sense. "I'm sorry you feel the need to lie about the stone in your walls, the wine in your glasses, and the cost of the dress on your back, to impress people who don't care about you at all. They care about the illusion you sell them, and tonight, I am sorry to say, the quality of your merchandise was exposed." I turned, addressing the whole table. "The Kinsley Quarry? It closed 2 years ago, I know. I had lunch with the owner, Mr. Kinsley, just last month. He sold his last commercial stone to a new subdivision on the west side. To claim it's imported, Carrara is not a mistake of memory. It is a calculated falsehood." I looked back at Serafina, who was now weeping, not in sadness, but in incandescent rage that she couldn't control. And most of all, "Serafina, I am sorry that you think the price of my son's love and devotion is the absolute silence of his mother. I have spent 76 years learning that truth is the only currency that matters. And for that truth, I will never, ever apologize. I didn't wait for the inevitable explosion. I didn't wait for Marcus to speak. I simply nodded once, turned on my heel, and walked out of the room, out of the corridor, and out of that glittering fake mansion, closing the massive, lacquered front door behind me with a decisive click that sounded like a coffin latching shut. The immediate fallout wasn't a bomb, but a series of cold, sharp ripples. I spent the drive home, and the first few hours back in my own cozy, unimported home, replaying the words. I poured myself a cup of tea, the mug chipped and dearly loved, and watched the night settle. I felt utterly alone, but also lighter than I had in years. I had risked my relationship with my son, but I had saved my soul. The next morning, the phone started ringing before 7. It was my sister, Clara, who has a terrifying network of suburban spies. "Ilara, what in the good heavens did you do? The whispers are everywhere. It's all over the tennis courts and the yacht club bar before the sun is even fully up," she crowed, her voice a mix of horror and delighted gossip. I recounted the full story: the limestone, the loan, the ultimatum, and my public exposure of her deception. "You're a legend," Clara finally decided. "But Marcus, how is he?" "Lost," I admitted, the truth tasting like bitter coffee. "He chose the money. He chose the lie. Now he has to choose which path he walks next." The calls continued throughout the day. Some were shocked, some were full of approval, many were from Serafina's acquaintances who confirmed my suspicions. The private jet she spoke of was a fractional share in a 30-year-old prop plane. The family estate in Tuscany was a 2-week Airbnb rental. The entire life was a debt-fueled performance designed to ensnare Marcus and then ensnare wealthy business partners. My little speech hadn't just exposed her. It had validated the quiet, creeping doubts of everyone in her circle. By late afternoon, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The suspense wasn't in what I had done. It was in what Serafina would do next. She was a cornered animal. Just as I was starting to believe the worst was over, I received a text message. It wasn't from Marcus. It was an anonymous number. The text was simple. The collateral isn't the house. It's the file. Check the safe. I stared at the message, the world tilting. The file? Marcus had mentioned a loan and collateral, but he had focused on the marble. What was this mysterious file? My heart began to hammer again, that cold fear returning. Serafina had always been obsessed with Marcus's late father, Jonathan. Not in a loving way, but in an extractive, curious one. She had spent a year prying into Jonathan's modest investment portfolio before declaring it boring. But Jonathan had a reputation for being secretive, especially about one failed business venture from the 80s that he swore he'd burned every piece of paper on. I tried calling Marcus, straight to voicemail. I called his office. He was in a closed-door meeting. I put on my sensible shoes, grabbed my keys, and drove back to the fortress. I didn't ring the bell. I used the spare key I still possessed, the key Serafina kept forgetting to ask for back. The air inside the mansion was heavy and dead. It smelled faintly of lilies and dread. The dining room was a scene of minor chaos. Servants were clearing the remnants of the disaster, moving with the quiet efficiency of people used to cleaning up emotional messes. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. But I heard raised voices coming from the sunroom, Serafina screaming, a sound devoid of the practiced elegance she usually maintained. I ignored the screaming and walked straight to Marcus's office, the one lined with the unread books. I remembered something Jonathan had told me years ago. Always keep the really important things where no one expects them. Ilara, not in the safe, but near it. There was a painting in the office, a large, garish, abstract piece Serafina had insisted on. Behind it, I knew, was a small wall safe. I pulled the painting aside. The safe was open, the steel door slightly ajar. Serafina never opened it. She had Marcus do it. I looked inside. It was empty, save for a few meaningless bank statements. My mind raced. The text said, "The file. Check the safe." The file was gone. I pressed the tip of my finger against the anonymous text's clue. The collateral isn't the house. It's the file. My eyes fell on a thick, hardbound book on the shelf immediately next to the safe. The History of Renaissance Forgery. It was open, spine up, on Marcus's desk. It looked like a very expensive bookmark. I opened the book. The pages had been meticulously hollowed out, forming a perfect, book-shaped cavity. Inside, nestled in the velvety dark, was a single manila file folder, thick with old paper. On the tab, written in Jonathan's spidery handwriting, was one word: Archimedes. I knew that name. Archimedes was the failed venture, a company Jonathan started with a wealthy, unsavory partner 40 years ago. It had ended in a lawsuit, a near bankruptcy, and a vow from Jonathan that the records were destroyed. I pulled out the file and quickly scanned the contents. It wasn't just old records. It was a complete signed confession from Jonathan's old partner, detailing a massive, decades-old tax fraud scheme and implicating several powerful, old-money families in the city. The file hadn't been destroyed. Jonathan had kept it as leverage, a safety harness, or perhaps a long-delayed moral bomb. But the most terrifying detail was on the last page. A document assigning control of the file to a certain bank, the same private lending firm Marcus and Serafina were dealing with. The signature line was dated just 6 months ago, witnessed and notarized under the heading, Contingent Collateral. Serafina hadn't been lying to the bank about the stone. She had used the stone to distract Marcus from the real collateral. The bank wasn't interested in the house. They were interested in the power this file held over their other wealthier clients. And Serafina had somehow been convinced to sign it over. Marcus was in debt, and Serafina had just gambled his father's deep, dark secret. The fear came back, but this time it was ice cold. This wasn't about a bad marriage. This was about criminal exposure. I heard the door slam, and Serafina's voice shriek, "Where is she?" That old witch. She's ruined us. I quickly slipped the file inside my own handbag, pulling the old book shut. I met Marcus in the hallway. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, his face etched with something beyond embarrassment. True, profound shock. "Mom?" he breathed, seeing the resolute look on my face. "What are you doing back here?" "I know about Archimedes, Marcus." He visibly staggered, his face going a terrible, pasty white. "How? You can't. Dad burned those papers." "No, he didn't. He hid them in a book and used them as contingent collateral. And Serafina, in her desperation for the next grand vanity project, signed them away to the private lender." He sank onto the nearest antique bench, putting his head in his hands. "It was the only way, Mom. They wouldn't give us the capital for the re-up otherwise. She told me it was an old, worthless business file, just a formality to establish a history of capital. She said the bank just wanted to look legitimate. I never read the fine print. I trusted her. The full, ugly truth came spilling out. Serafina hadn't just exaggerated the imported marble. She had meticulously and deliberately over-leveraged them, convincing Marcus that the only way to keep their life afloat was through increasingly dangerous loans. My comment about the limestone had created the initial panic. Yes, but it was Serafina's fear that the banker's wife, Beatrice, would recognize the deceit and call off the loan, which would force the bank to immediately call in the ultimate collateral, the Archimedes file. They were going to expose those old families. Mom and Dad's name would be all over it. Everything he worked to hide, gone. He looked up, tears finally tracing clean lines through the dirt of his despair. "I'm so sorry. You were right. It was damp sand, and I forced you to apologize for telling the truth." I sat beside him, putting my arm around the shell of my son. He was broken, but at least he was seeing clearly. "You're not in trouble yet, son," I said, patting his back. "I have the file now. The bank may have the paperwork, but I have the physical evidence." Just then, Serafina burst into the hallway. She saw us sitting together, her husband clinging to his mother, and her eyes narrowed to slits of pure malice. "You," she screeched, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at me. "You came back here to finish me, didn't you? You jealous old woman. It's your fault." "Your fault, Marcus, is a failure." I stood up, holding my worn, sensible handbag tight. "Serafina, the foundation has crumbled. The truth is out, and I've just recovered the Archimedes file. Your leverage is gone. You are officially empty." She paused, the blood draining from her face, suddenly realizing the scale of her loss. She lunged for my bag, a wild, inelegant move that betrayed her carefully constructed image. I sidestepped her easily. "Don't touch me, dear. You have two choices. Pack your authentic possessions and leave quietly, or I will hand this file to the federal prosecutor, and they can trace the paper trail that leads right to your signature on the contingent collateral document." Serafina didn't fight back. She collapsed onto the floor, not crying, but hissing, her beautiful gown pooling around her like an oil slick. She knew in that moment that the opera was over and the house lights had come on. The divorce was quick and quiet. Marcus finally listened to me, hired a ferocious lawyer, and cut Serafina out completely. Because the bank never got the Archimedes file, and Marcus worked quickly to refinance the loan with a legitimate institution, the house of cards didn't fall on his head. It fell on hers. The lenders didn't want the scandal of the file. They just wanted their money. The final cost of my apology was the loss of that glittering mansion. Marcus sold it swiftly, taking a substantial loss, but wiping the slate clean of Serafina's debt and deception. He moved into a modest, older home closer to my own. It has uneven floors, a kitchen that smells like real cooking, and a yard that needs tending. The furniture is solid, comfortable, and definitely not imported. He comes over every Sunday now. Not for show, but for my chili and to talk, really talk, about his work, his fears, and his life. He finally remembered where he came from, and more importantly, he remembered who he was. Ladies, sometimes standing up for yourself means risking everything. It means choosing the anger, the judgment, and the loneliness that comes with speaking your truth over the convenience of a comfortable lie. But trust me, that risk is worth the life you get back. I still have the Archimedes file. It sits in a secure vault now, a quiet, dusty reminder of the cost of greed and the terrifying power of secrets. It's the ultimate security blanket for my son. And if you ever find yourself in a room full of fakes, remember this: you are the real deal. You are the one with the courage to be honest, to love fiercely, and to never, ever forget that the simplest truth can bring down the grandest deception. I never got the public applause, but I got my son back. And that, in my mid-70s, is the most imported, exclusive treasure a woman could ever ask for.